The room was already full when she arrived, the kind of full that made every sound feel smaller. Soft laughter moved through the air, mixed with the clink of glasses and the low hum of polite conversation. Tall lights reflected off polished floors, and everything looked carefully arranged, as if nothing had been left to chance. She stepped inside quietly, wearing plain clothes that matched her role, not the place. No one looked at her for more than a second. To most of the guests, she was simply part of the evening, like the chairs or the candles. She had worked many events like this before. Large rooms, elegant settings, people who spoke with confidence and ease. She knew how to move without drawing attention, how to stand just far enough away to not interrupt conversations, how to smile politely without inviting questions. It was a skill she had learned over time, not written anywhere, but practiced every day. Tonight felt no different at first. In the corner of the room stood a grand piano. It was black and glossy, its surface so clean that it reflected the lights above like still water. It looked expensive, important, and untouched. Most guests passed by it without a glance. It was there to complete the image of the evening, not to be played. She noticed it right away, as she always did. Her eyes went to it without thinking, the same way some people notice the window or the door. She did not stop walking. She had learned long ago that looking too long could invite questions she didn't want to answer. As she moved between tables, she listened, not in a curious way, but in the quiet, distant way of someone who has learned to hear without reacting. People talked about travel plans, business deals, small complaints, and polite praise for the event. The words floated around her without settling. She focused on her work, keeping her hands steady and her steps careful. From time to time, music played softly through speakers hidden in the room. It was pleasant but forgettable, meant to fill space rather than hold attention. Someone joked that it would be nice to hear the piano instead. A few laughed. Another person replied that it was probably just for show. The comment was casual, without any real thought behind it. She heard it all while standing nearby, adjusting items on a table. Her expression did not change. Inside, something stirred, but she pushed it down. She had learned how to do that. Later in the evening, the mood shifted slightly. People had relaxed. Voices grew louder. Laughter lasted longer. Someone pointed toward the piano again, this time with more interest. They wondered out loud if anyone there could play. A guest suggested that the hired musician should give a short performance, but he was busy speaking with others. The idea floated around the table, passing from one person to the next, until it landed close to her. Someone noticed her standing nearby and said, half joking, that she could play a simple tune if no one else wanted to. The tone was light, friendly on the surface, but careless underneath. A few people smiled. Some looked curious. Others didn't look at her at all. She paused for a brief moment, her hands still. She felt the familiar mix of heat and calm rise in her chest. This had happened before, in different ways, in different places. The request was not cruel, but it wasn't serious either. It was the kind of suggestion people made when they assumed the answer didn't matter. She replied politely, saying very little. She did not agree or refuse right away. The conversation moved on as quickly as it had started. The moment passed, or so it seemed. But something had already changed. As she continued working, her thoughts returned to the piano, not as a dream or a wish, but as a memory. She remembered smaller rooms, colder nights, and the sound of keys pressed gently to avoid waking others. She remembered practicing quietly, often stopping when footsteps came close. She remembered being told to keep it simple, to not expect much, to be realistic. Over time, those words had settled deep inside her, shaping the way she moved through the world. She had learned to keep her talent private, not because she lacked confidence, but because experience had taught her that showing it at the wrong time could cost her more than it gave. It was easier to stay silent, safer to be unseen. Across the room, the piano waited. Its bench was perfectly aligned. The lid was closed. No sheet music rested on top. It looked untouched, almost lonely. She wondered how long it had been since someone had played it with care. Another guest mentioned the idea again, this time louder. Someone said it would be entertaining to hear a simple melody, nothing serious. The words simple were repeated, as if to make the suggestion harmless. A few people turned to look at her. Their expressions were mixed: curiosity, amusement, indifference. She felt the weight of those looks. But she did not rush. She finished what she was doing, placing an item carefully where it belonged. Her movements were steady. Inside, she was measuring something, not the room or the people, but herself. She asked a quiet question that only she could hear. Was this the moment? Or just another test? She had learned that moments like this rarely announced themselves clearly. They often arrived dressed as jokes or accidents. Most people missed them without realizing what they were. She had missed many herself. When she finally looked toward the group, her face was calm. She did not smile too much or lower her eyes. She simply acknowledged the request. Someone laughed lightly, as if expecting her to decline. Another person shrugged, already losing interest. She said she could try, but only something very simple. The words felt safe. They matched what was expected. The group reacted with polite encouragement, not excitement. No one moved to make space. No one hushed the room. It was still a casual idea, nothing more. She stepped away briefly, as if to finish her duties. Her heart beat a little faster, but her breathing stayed even. She reminded herself that she had nothing to prove, that playing a few notes would not change who she was or how people saw her. Still, something pulled her forward. The hired musician noticed the attention shifting and glanced toward the piano. His expression showed mild interest, but no concern. He had played in many places like this and had seen many small interruptions. This felt like one of them. She moved closer to the piano at last. The room did not go silent. Conversations continued, though a few people watched her with mild interest. Someone whispered a comment that made another person smile. She reached the piano and rested her hand lightly on its surface. The wood felt cool and familiar. For a brief second, the noise around her faded. She was aware of her surroundings, but they no longer pressed in on her. There was only the piano and the space between her and the keys. She sat down carefully, adjusting the bench just slightly. The movement was small, but practiced. A few nearby guests noticed and exchanged looks. Something about the way she moved suggested purpose, not uncertainty. She lifted the lid and placed her hands over the keys without playing. She closed her eyes for a moment, not in drama, but in habit. It was the same pause she always took before beginning, no matter where she was. Someone reminded her, gently, to keep it simple. She nodded. The words did not bother her. They were familiar. Her fingers hovered, ready. The room was still not fully quiet, but a few conversations had softened. People sensed that something was about to happen, even if they didn't expect much from it. She took a breath, steady and slow. The first note had not yet been played, but the moment had already begun. The first sound that came from the piano was soft, almost fragile. It was the kind of note that could easily be missed if someone wasn't paying attention. A few people nearby continued talking, unaware that anything had begun. But those closest to the piano felt something shift, even if they couldn't explain it. The note didn't demand attention. It invited it. She played the opening slowly, keeping her hands light. It was exactly what had been asked of her. A simple tune, clean and familiar. Anyone listening could recognize it within seconds. It was the kind of melody people heard growing up, the kind that felt safe and ordinary. Some guests smiled politely. One person nodded, as if to say, "This is fine. This is what we expected." Her face showed no sign of effort. She wasn't trying to impress. She wasn't rushing. Each note was placed carefully, like stepping stones across quiet water. The room did not fall silent yet, but conversation softened. People lowered their voices without realizing why. She stayed within the shape of the melody at first, honoring its simplicity. But as her fingers moved, something deeper guided them. It wasn't a decision made in that moment. It came from years of listening, practicing, and holding back. The tune began to breathe in a way it hadn't before. A guest near the piano paused mid-sentence. Another leaned slightly forward in their chair. Someone who had been scrolling on a phone looked up. The change was subtle, but it was there. The music was no longer background sound. It was becoming the center of the room. She added a gentle turn in the melody. Nothing dramatic, just enough to give it warmth. It was the kind of detail that trained ears noticed first. The hired musician across the room shifted his attention fully now. His casual smile faded, replaced by focus. He recognized control when he heard it. She kept her posture relaxed, shoulders loose, breathing steady. Anyone watching closely could see that this was not luck. Her hands moved with quiet confidence, guided by memory and instinct. The piano responded easily, as if it had been waiting. The simple tune began to stretch. Not louder, not faster, just fuller. Notes lingered a fraction longer. Harmonies appeared where none had been before. The melody stayed familiar, but it carried more weight now, more feeling. It sounded like a story instead of a song. The room grew quieter. Chairs stopped moving. Glasses were set down carefully. Even those who didn't understand music felt something pulling them in. It wasn't about skill alone. It was about honesty, about someone speaking clearly without words. She thought briefly of the times she had been told to stay small, to not take risks, to keep things simple. Those voices had once lived loudly in her mind. Tonight, they were distant. She wasn't trying to silence them. She was simply moving past them. Her left hand deepened the sound, adding strength beneath the melody. It grounded the music, gave it shape. The tune no longer floated. It stood firmly on its own. A few guests exchanged looks, surprised by how invested they felt. Someone near the back of the room whispered that she was good. Another replied quietly, "Better than good." The words spread slowly, not in excitement, but in disbelief. This was not what anyone had expected when the suggestion was made. She let the music rise just a little, enough to fill the space. The piano's sound reached the far walls now, clear and steady. The speakers that had played earlier felt unnecessary, forgotten. All attention belonged to the person at the bench. Her fingers moved faster for a brief moment, not to show off, but to release something held inside. It was controlled, precise, and purposeful. The melody bent and returned, like a breath taken and released. The room responded with complete silence. The hired musician leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His expression held respect now, not curiosity. He knew how hard it was to make something simple sound alive. This was not accidental. This was earned. She eased the tune back into calm, allowing the energy to settle. The music softened again, but it did not fade. It held the room gently, asking everyone to stay with it just a little longer. Some guests felt a tightness in their chest they couldn't explain. Others felt memories surface, moments from their own lives connected to similar sounds. That was the quiet power of what she was doing. She wasn't performing at them. She was sharing something real. Her eyes remained on the keys, but her awareness stretched beyond them. She sensed the stillness, the attention, the shift. She did not let it change her. She stayed present, focused on the next note, the next breath. The simple tune had become something personal now. It carried patience, longing, and resolve. It spoke of waiting and persistence, of finding space where there was none before. When she reached the final phrase, she slowed again. The notes fell gently, one after the other, each one clear. She let the last note ring fully before lifting her hands. The sound faded, but no one spoke. The silence felt heavy, full of meaning. It stretched longer than expected, as if the room needed time to return to itself. She lowered her hands to her lap and waited. She did not look up right away. She wasn't sure what would come next, and she didn't rush to find out. Then someone exhaled loudly, breaking the stillness. Another person began to clap, hesitant at first. The applause spread slowly, building as people stood or leaned forward. It was not polite applause. It was honest. She looked up now, surprised by the intensity of the reaction. Faces that had once held casual amusement now showed respect, curiosity, and even gratitude. Some smiled warmly. Others looked thoughtful, as if they had witnessed something unexpected and meaningful. She stood from the bench, unsure of where to place herself. Applause continued, filling the space the music had left behind. She nodded slightly, acknowledging the room, still grounded, still calm. The hired musician stood as well, joining the applause. Their eyes met briefly. In that moment, there was understanding. No words were needed. As the clapping slowly faded, conversations did not resume right away. People needed a moment. She stepped back from the piano, her heart steady, her mind clear. What had begun as a simple request had changed the tone of the entire evening, and though she did not yet know it, it had also changed something within her. She returned to her role quietly, but nothing felt the same anymore. The room held her differently now, and deep inside, she knew that this moment was only the beginning. After the applause faded, the room did not return to normal right away. People stood where they were, unsure of how to move forward. Conversations restarted slowly, quieter than before, as if everyone was careful not to break something fragile. She felt this shift as she walked away from the piano, carrying the calm of the moment with her. She returned to her tasks, but now eyes followed her, not in a loud or uncomfortable way, just brief glances filled with curiosity. A few guests smiled as she passed. One person nodded in approval. Another whispered a thank you as she walked by. She replied with small smiles, still unsure how to hold all of this attention. Inside, her thoughts were steady but full. She was not replaying the music in her mind. She was thinking about what came after moments like this. Experience had taught her that praise could fade as quickly as it arrived. She had learned not to build hopes too high, no matter how real the moment felt. Near the piano, a small group gathered, talking quietly about what they had heard. Some tried to describe it using words like talent and skill, but others struggled to explain why it felt different. One guest said it felt honest. Another said it felt familiar, like a memory returning. The hired musician approached her a short while later. His tone was calm and respectful. He told her she had played beautifully and asked where she had trained. She answered simply, without details. She was used to keeping her past short and vague. He did not press. He understood more than he said. He asked if she ever performed publicly. She shook her head. The truth was complicated, and she chose not to explain it fully. He nodded again, as if he already knew. As the evening continued, the host of the event noticed the change in atmosphere. People were more connected now, more present. The piano had become a point of quiet conversation, and her performance had become the heart of the night. The host asked if she would consider playing once more later, perhaps something longer. She felt the familiar pull of hesitation. Playing once had felt natural. Playing again felt like a choice with weight. She asked for a little time to think, and the host agreed without pressure. She stepped outside briefly, into a quieter space away from the lights and voices. The air felt cooler, grounding her. She leaned against a wall and took a slow breath. Moments like this had a way of stirring old doubts. Questions surfaced that she had learned to ignore. Was she ready to be seen again? Was she willing to let this moment grow into something more? She remembered times when attention had led to disappointment, when promises had been made and then quietly withdrawn, when effort had not been enough. Those memories did not control her anymore, but they still existed. Inside the room, guests continued to talk about her performance. Some wondered why they had never heard of her. Others assumed she must have chosen a quiet life. A few imagined stories that fit their expectations. None of them knew the truth, and that was fine. She returned inside after a few minutes. The noise felt louder now, but not overwhelming. She moved through the space with the same steady pace as before, but something in her posture had changed. She stood a little taller, not from pride, but from certainty. A guest approached her with kind eyes and said the music had meant something personal. She listened, letting the words settle. These moments mattered more than applause. They reminded her why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. The host returned and asked again, gently, if she would play once more. This time, she agreed, not because she felt pressured, but because she felt ready. The decision came quietly, without drama. When she sat at the piano again, the room responded differently. This time, people made space. Conversations stopped on their own. There was no laughter, no suggestion to keep it simple. There was only waiting. She chose a piece that was still modest but deeper, something she had played many times in private. It carried emotion without asking for attention. As she played, the room listened fully. The connection felt stronger now, built on trust rather than surprise. She felt herself settle into the music, no longer aware of who was watching. The piano felt like an extension of her breath. Each note carried intention, shaped by experience and restraint. When she finished, the response was softer than before, but just as powerful. People did not rush to clap. Some simply sat quietly, absorbing the sound that lingered in the air afterward. The host thanked her sincerely. There was no talk of payment or favors, just appreciation. It felt honest, which mattered most to her. As the evening began to close, guests slowly departed. A few stopped to speak with her, offering encouragement or asking questions. She answered politely but did not promise anything. She had learned to let possibilities unfold at their own pace. The hired musician spoke with her once more before leaving. He encouraged her not to hide her gift for too long. His words were not advice, just understanding. She thanked him and watched as he walked away. When the room finally emptied, she helped with the final tasks. The lights dimmed. Chairs were stacked. The piano stood quietly again, its surface reflecting fewer lights now. She paused beside it one last time. She rested her hand on the smooth wood, feeling gratitude rather than longing. She knew she would carry this night with her, not as proof, but as a reminder. As she stepped out into the night, the city's sounds greeted her. Life continued, unchanged in many ways. But inside, something had shifted. She did not know what would come next. There were no clear signs, no promises waiting for her. But she knew one thing for certain: she no longer felt invisible. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. The days after the event moved forward as they always did. But she noticed small changes right away. She walked the same streets, took the same routes, and followed the same routines. Yet her steps felt lighter. The memory of the piano stayed with her, not loudly, but steadily, like a quiet companion. She tried not to think too much about what had happened. She had learned that overthinking could turn good moments into heavy ones. Still, fragments returned to her at unexpected times. The stillness of the room, the way people had listened, the feeling of being understood without speaking. At work, things were mostly the same. She blended into the background again, doing what was expected of her. But once in a while, someone would recognize her. A guest from the event would pause, look twice, and then smile. Sometimes they would say nothing. Other times they would mention the music, softly, as if sharing a secret. She accepted these moments with calm gratitude. She did not let them define her days. She reminded herself that one evening did not change a lifetime, but it had opened a door she could no longer pretend wasn't there. One afternoon, she received a message from the event host. The words were polite and simple. There was an upcoming gathering, smaller and quieter, and they wondered if she would consider playing. There was no pressure, only an invitation. She read the message more than once. Her first instinct was to decline, not out of fear, but out of habit. Saying no had always felt easier. It kept expectations low and protected her from disappointment. She set the message aside and went about her day, but the thought followed her. That evening, she sat alone in her small space, listening to the distant sounds of the city. She imagined the piano again, not as an object, but as a voice waiting to be used. She asked herself what she wanted, not what felt safe. The answer surprised her with its clarity. She wanted to play, not to prove anything, but to feel that connection again. She replied with a simple yes. The days leading up to the gathering passed quickly. She practiced in quiet moments, careful not to disturb anyone nearby. Her playing was not about perfection. It was about honesty. She chose pieces that felt close to her, melodies that carried both struggle and calm. On the day of the gathering, she arrived early. The space was smaller than the previous event, with fewer people and softer lights. The piano stood near a window, sunlight resting gently on its surface. It felt welcoming rather than intimidating. As guests arrived, there was no announcement. No one pointed her out. She appreciated that. When the time felt right, she sat at the piano and began to play. This time, there was no surprise, no disbelief. The room listened from the first note. The music flowed easily, shaped by confidence earned through restraint. She felt grounded, present, and free. When she finished, the response was warm and sincere. People thanked her personally. A few shared how the music made them feel. One person asked if she had ever thought about recording or performing more often. The question lingered with her long after the gathering ended. Over the next few weeks, similar invitations appeared. Small events, private gatherings, nothing grand or overwhelming. She accepted some and declined others, choosing carefully. Each time she played, her confidence grew, not from applause, but from consistency. She also faced doubt. Some days, old fears returned. She wondered if this attention would last, or if it would fade as suddenly as it had arrived. She reminded herself that she was not chasing recognition. She was following something deeper. One evening, after a small performance, she sat alone at the piano long after everyone had left. The room was quiet, the lights dim. She played softly, just for herself. In that moment, she felt a sense of peace she had not known in years. She realized then that her relationship with music had changed. It was no longer something she hid or protected. It was something she shared, carefully, and on her own terms. Word of her playing continued to spread, slowly and naturally. There were no headlines or grand offers, just genuine interest from people who had listened. She met others like herself, people who had taken long paths back to what they loved. Their stories reminded her that growth did not follow a straight line. One afternoon, she was asked if she would consider teaching a few lessons to someone who had recently discovered a love for the piano. The idea made her smile. Teaching felt different from performing, but just as meaningful. She agreed. As weeks turned into months, her life began to shift in small but steady ways. Music became part of her days again, not as a secret, but as a presence. She balanced it carefully with her responsibilities, refusing to rush. She learned to say yes without losing herself, and no without guilt. Looking back, she understood that the simple tune she had been asked to play had never been simple at all. It had been an invitation, not just to perform, but to step forward. She did not know where this path would lead, There were still uncertainties, still challenges waiting ahead, but she felt ready now, not because everything was clear, but because she trusted herself, and that trust, she knew, was the true triumph. Time did not change everything at once. Instead, it worked quietly, shaping her days in small, steady ways. Music no longer felt like something borrowed from the past. It had become part of her present, woven into her routines and choices. She still lived simply, still worked hard, but now there was a sense of direction beneath everything she did. She continued to play at small gatherings, never chasing bigger stages, never forcing the next step. Each invitation was considered carefully. She listened to her instincts more than expectations. When something felt right, she accepted. When it didn't, she declined without explanation. People began to recognize her not just for her playing, but for the way she carried herself, calm, grounded, unrushed. Those who listened felt that her music came from a place of patience, not ambition. That was what made it stay with them. One evening, she was invited to play at a charity event held in a modest hall. It was nothing like the elegant room where it had all begun. The chairs were simple. The lights were warm but uneven. The piano showed signs of age. Yet something about the space felt honest. She arrived early and tested the keys. Some were slightly out of tune. She adjusted her touch, adapting without frustration. This was something she had learned long ago. Music was not about perfect conditions. It was about connection. As people filled the room, she watched them quietly. There were families, older couples, young listeners sitting close together. No one was dressed to impress. They had come to support a cause, not to be entertained. That mattered to her. When she began to play, the room listened in a way that felt different from before. There was no surprise, no judgment, only openness. The music moved gently through the space, resting on faces, settling into silence. She felt something shift inside her as she played. Not excitement, not nerves, but clarity. She understood then that this was where she belonged, not on a stage defined by status, but in moments defined by meaning. After the performance, people thanked her quietly. Some shared stories of their own struggles, their own unfinished dreams. She listened more than she spoke. These exchanges stayed with her longer than applause ever could. That night, as she walked home, she realized she was no longer measuring her worth by how others reacted. She was measuring it by how true she felt to herself. Weeks later, she was asked to help organize a small community music program. The idea was simple: provide access to instruments and guidance for those who had never had the chance. There was no funding at first, no clear structure, just interest and hope. She agreed to help, not knowing exactly what she could offer. She gave time where she could. She taught basic lessons. She listened to beginners struggle and encouraged them through it. She recognized herself in their uncertainty. Watching others discover music reminded her of why she had fallen in love with it in the first place. It wasn't about recognition. It was about expression. About finding a voice when words weren't enough. As the program grew slowly, she saw change not only in the students, but in herself. She felt more rooted, more patient. Her playing deepened, shaped by everything she was learning from others. Occasionally, someone would ask why she hadn't pursued a more public path earlier. She never had a simple answer. Life had asked different things of her at different times. She had done what she could with what she had. Now, she was doing the same. One afternoon, she returned to the venue where the first performance had taken place. She was there for work, nothing more. The room looked smaller than she remembered. The piano stood in the same corner, polished and quiet. She paused beside it, resting her hand on the surface. She did not feel nervous or emotional. She felt grateful. She understood now that the moment of triumph people spoke about was not the applause or the attention. It was the decision she had made to step forward when she could have stepped away. That choice had changed her path, not dramatically, but truthfully. As she continued on, opportunities came and went. Some led to music, others did not. She learned that fulfillment did not come from constant progress, but from alignment. She still practiced alone at night sometimes, playing softly, just for herself. Those moments were no longer filled with longing. They were filled with peace. People who heard her story often focused on the night she was given a simple tune. They saw it as the beginning. But she knew better. The real beginning had been years earlier, in quiet rooms, in moments of doubt, in choices to keep going when no one was watching. That night had not created her talent. It had revealed it. And the triumph had not been in proving others wrong. It had been in finally trusting herself enough to be seen. She did not know how far her music would travel. She did not need to know. What mattered was that she was no longer waiting, she was living. And every time her fingers touched the keys, she remembered that even the simplest tune could carry a lifetime of truth, if played with honesty.